There's a version of you that's exhausted. Not physically, though maybe that too, but exhausted in a deeper way. Tired of pushing, tired of trying so hard to make things happen, tired of gripping life with both hands and watching things still slip through. You've been told your whole life, work harder, be more disciplined, take control, plan everything. And yet, here you are, feeling like you're swimming against a current that never seems to stop. Carl Jung, one of the most profound thinkers of the 20th century, had something to say about that. And it wasn't what you'd expect from a scientist. He said, "Stop forcing." He said the deepest part of you, the part he called the self, already knows the way. And the more you override it with ego, with will, with desperate control, the more lost you become. Today, we're going to sit with that idea, not as abstract philosophy, not as something to analyze and file away, but as something you can actually feel in your own life, something that might, if you let it, change how you move through the world. Because if you've ever had the feeling that you're trying too hard to become someone you already are, this is for you. Let's start with something honest. We love control. We're addicted to it. And it makes sense. We live in a world that rewards planning, executing, optimizing. The whole modern project is built on the idea that if you just apply enough intelligence and effort, you can bend reality to your will. And for a while, it works. You get the grades, you get the job, you get the relationship, you get the apartment, you follow the steps, and the steps follow through. But here's what Jung noticed, and what a lot of us quietly feel but rarely say out loud. That strategy breaks down. Not sometimes, eventually, always. He wrote extensively about the ego, the conscious, planning, striving part of the mind, the part that makes to-do lists, the part that sets 5-year goals, the part that lies awake at 2 a.m. running scenarios. The ego isn't bad. Jung never said it was. You need it. It's how you navigate the world. But the ego has a fatal flaw. It thinks it's the whole story. It thinks it's in charge. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate, said Carl Jung. Think about that. The things you haven't faced, the fears you've suppressed, the grief you've pushed down, the desires you've told yourself are unrealistic, they don't disappear, they go underground. And from underground, they steer. You think you're choosing your relationships, your career, your reactions, but so much of that is driven by forces you haven't looked at yet, forces that live below the waterline of your awareness. Jung called this realm the unconscious, and he spent his entire career mapping it, not to control it, but to listen to it, to learn its language, to stop fighting it and start cooperating with it. That's what "don't force anything" really means. It's not passivity, it's not giving up, it's recognizing that there's something wiser than your ego at work inside you, and maybe, just maybe, worth trusting. Now, before we go further, we need to talk about something that might make some of you uncomfortable: Jung's relationship with God. Because Jung wasn't a preacher, he wasn't a theologian, he was a psychiatrist and a scientist. And yet, late in his life, someone asked him directly, "Do you believe in God?" And he said, famously, "I don't believe, I know." What did he mean by that? He didn't mean God in the Sunday sermon sense. He didn't mean a figure in the sky dispensing rewards and punishments. He meant something he'd encountered personally, in his own psyche, in his patient's dreams, in the strange patterns of life that no rational explanation seemed to cover. He called it by many names: the self, the numinous, the greater psyche, the divine within. He saw it as the totality of what we are, conscious and unconscious, known and unknown. And he believed this totality had an intelligence, a direction, a kind of wisdom that the small ego self could barely comprehend. He took religious experience seriously, not as superstition, not as a coping mechanism for people who hadn't discovered science yet, but as one of the most significant and irreducible facts of human psychology. Something real was happening in those moments of awe and surrender, something the language of reason couldn't fully hold. So when we say, let God guide you through a Jungian lens, we're really saying, let the deeper intelligence within you lead sometimes. The part that speaks through dreams, through gut feelings, through the unexpected turn of events that somehow led you exactly where you needed to be. Let that part have a say. Stop drowning it out with noise. Stop overriding every instinct with logic. Stop treating your inner life like a problem to be solved and start treating it like a conversation to be had. That's the invitation Jung extended, and it costs nothing to try it, except maybe your attachment to being in charge of everything. Have you ever been thinking about someone, really thinking about them, and then your phone rings and it's them? Have you ever been at the lowest point of your life and a book fell off a shelf and opened to exactly the page you needed? Have you ever taken a wrong turn that somehow led you to something that changed your life? Most of us chalk these things up to coincidence, and maybe sometimes that's true. But Jung had another word for it, synchronicity. He defined it as a meaningful coincidence, two events that have no logical causal link but carry a deep significance for the person experiencing them. Something that arrives not from the world of cause and effect, but from somewhere else, somewhere harder to name. He first developed this idea with a patient who was stuck. She was brilliant, analytical, deeply skeptical, and her very rationalism was preventing her from making any progress. She had a dream about a golden scarab beetle. The next day, during their session, a real scarab beetle, rare in Switzerland, flew against the window. Jung opened it, caught the beetle, handed it to her, and said, "Here is your scarab." Something cracked open after that. Her defenses fell. Her healing began. Now, you can explain that away. You can call it coincidence and move on. But what Jung was pointing at was something subtler. Reality itself sometimes seems to arrange itself around the interior movements of the psyche. Life and soul appear to be in conversation. And if that's even occasionally true, if life sometimes speaks in symbols, in timing, in unexpected encounters, then forcing your way through it with brute will is a little like walking into a conversation already shouting. Synchronicities tend to happen when we're open, when we're paying attention, when we've slowed down enough to notice the thread. They tend to dry up when we're in full hustle mode, head down, grinding, forcing. In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order, said Carl Jung. Jung wasn't asking you to believe in magic, he was asking you to stay awake, to notice what's trying to reach you through the cracks of your perfectly organized life. Here's maybe the most important distinction in all of Jung's psychology, and once you feel it, really feel it, you'll start seeing it everywhere in your own life. The ego is who you think you are. The self is who you actually are. The ego is your name, your story, your personality, your preferences, your fears, and your ambitions. It's real, but it's small. It's the part of the iceberg above the waterline. The self, with a capital S, is the totality, everything above and below, conscious and unconscious, the part of you that was there before language gave you words for yourself, the part that shows up in your deepest dreams, the part that knows, even when your mind doesn't, what you really need. Jung believed the self was the true center of the psyche, not the ego. The self is older, wiser, deeper, and the whole project of psychological growth, what he called individuation, is essentially the ego gradually learning to serve the self instead of ruling over it. And here's where forcing comes in. When we force things, we're doing it from the ego. We've decided what we want, how it should look, when it should arrive. We have a plan, and we drive that plan with our will, our ambition, our anxiety. Because the ego is terrified of uncertainty. The ego needs to know. Learning to sit in the not knowing without collapsing into anxiety, without forcing a premature decision, is one of the most Jungian practices you can develop. And it looks like trusting the strange pull you sometimes feel towards things that don't fully make sense. The career pivot that everyone thinks is crazy, the creative project you've been avoiding because you're afraid of what it reveals, the conversation you've been putting off because it might change everything. That pull, Jung would say that's the self calling, not loudly, never loudly, but persistently. And the more you learn to distinguish that quiet voice from the ego's noise, the more you realize it's been trying to guide you for a very long time. Now, before we go further, we need to talk about something that might make some of you uncomfortable: Jung's relationship with God. Because Jung wasn't a preacher, he wasn't a theologian.